Some families love you no matter what. Others love you only if you become exactly who they want you to be. And when you refuse, they erase you like you never existed. Grace Montgomery learned this truth at 22 years old, sitting at her family's mahogany dining table when her father looked her in the eye and said 5 words that would haunt her for the next decade. "You're dead to us now." But this story doesn't start there. It starts 10 years later, on a cold Thanksgiving evening, in a cramped studio apartment where 32-year-old Grace sits alone at a paint-stained table, Chinese takeout growing cold beside her, while the rest of the world celebrates with the people they love. Through her thin apartment walls, she can hear her neighbors laughing, music playing, children squealing with delight. Grace dips her brush into crimson paint and continues working on a canvas that no one will see tonight. No one will call. No one will text. No one will knock on her door. This is what the last 10 Thanksgivings have looked like. This is what happens when your family decides you're not worth loving anymore. You see, Grace wasn't always alone. She grew up in a beautiful colonial house with perfectly manicured lawns, attended the finest private schools, wore designer clothes, and had every material comfort a child could want. But in the Montgomery household, love wasn't given freely. It was earned. It was conditional. It was a performance. Her mother, Patricia, was a cold, critical socialite who cared more about appearances than her daughter's happiness. Her father, Richard, was a successful attorney who only noticed Grace when she achieved something he could brag about to his colleagues. And her older brother, Christopher, he was the golden child who could do no wrong, while Grace was the daughter who could never quite measure up. So Grace tried. God, how she tried. Straight A's, piano recitals, violin performances, dating boys from appropriate families, wearing the right clothes, saying the right things, becoming a perfect hollow version of herself, just to earn a fraction of the love she desperately craved. But there was one thing Grace couldn't fake, one passion she couldn't suppress: art. When Grace painted, she felt alive. When she created, she felt like herself. But to her parents, art was a hobby, a distraction, something frivolous that serious people didn't waste their time on. So Grace buried it. She studied business in college like they demanded. She dated Preston, the controlling but well-connected young man they adored. She was 22 years old and suffocating under the weight of a life that wasn't hers, until she got accepted into the Berkshire Art Residency in California, a prestigious year-long program for emerging artists. The opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to finally live for herself. And that's when everything shattered. Grace arranged a family dinner to share her news. She was nervous, but hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, they'd support her this time. But the moment she mentioned the word art, her mother's face turned to stone. Art is a hobby, Grace, not a career. Her father's disappointment was palpable. "You're throwing away a business degree for painting?" Her brother laughed. Actually laughed. "You're going to be a starving artist. What about Preston? What about your future?" Grace tried to explain. This was her future. This was what she wanted. But her parents weren't listening. They never really listened. Her mother's voice turned ice cold. "If you choose this path, you're choosing to walk away from us." And when Grace stood up from that table, when she said, "Then I choose myself," her father delivered his ultimatum. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back. You'll no longer be part of this family." Grace looked at her father, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "You don't mean that." But he did. "You're dead to us," he said. Just like that. 22 years of being their daughter, erased in a single sentence. And they meant it. They changed the locks, removed her from family accounts, stopped answering her calls, returned her birthday cards unopened, told extended family that Grace had chosen a different path, making it sound like she abandoned them. For 10 years, Grace tried to reconcile. For 10 years, she was met with silence, until eventually she stopped trying. The rejection was too painful. The message was too clear. She wasn't wanted. So Grace built a life alone. She completed the art residency, She became a working artist, not wealthy, but surviving doing what she loved. She taught art classes during the day, sold paintings on the side, lived in a small apartment, and convinced herself she didn't need anyone. But here's the thing about convincing yourself you don't need love. It doesn't make the loneliness hurt any less. Grace dated occasionally, but she never let anyone too close. Because if your own family can abandon you, what's to stop anyone else from doing the same? Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a woman in her 60s, with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile, walked into Grace's community center art class. Her name was Rosa Torres, and she had just retired and decided to take up painting as a hobby. Rosa was everything Grace's mother wasn't. Warm, kind, genuinely interested in people. She stayed after class to chat. She asked questions about Grace's work. She showed Grace photos of her 4 children and 6 grandchildren with such obvious pride and love that it made Grace's chest ache. And one day, after class, Rosa asked the question that changed everything. "Do you have familia, mija?" Grace's smile faltered. "No," she said quietly. "It's just me." Rosa's face filled with such genuine concern that Grace had to look away. "Just you? No parents? No siblings?" Grace forced the words out. "I have them. We're just not in contact." She didn't elaborate. She didn't explain. She changed the subject as quickly as possible. But Rosa, being Rosa, didn't forget. A few weeks later, Rosa mentioned to her carpenter son Samuel that her art teacher was a lovely young woman who was all alone in the world. Samuel, suspicious of his mother's matchmaking tendencies, agreed to help fix Grace's broken cabinet. Just a favor, nothing more. But when Samuel Torres showed up at Grace's apartment with his toolbox and his kind eyes and his gentle smile, something shifted. He was respectful, grounded. He talked about his mother with such warmth that Grace felt a pang of grief for what she'd lost. And when he finished fixing her cabinet and refused payment, he made an offer that terrified her. "Come to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My mom would love that." Grace panicked. Sunday dinner meant family. Family meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the possibility of rejection, of abandonment, of being erased all over again. She made excuses. But Samuel didn't push. He just left his number and said, "The offer stands." For days, Grace stared at that piece of paper. Part of her desperately wanted to experience what a real family dinner felt like. Part of her was terrified. What if they rejected her too? What if she didn't fit in? What if she let herself hope for belonging and lost it all over again? But loneliness is a powerful motivator, and hope, no matter how small, is hard to kill completely. So Grace picked up her phone and texted Samuel, "Is the Sunday dinner invitation still open?" His response came within seconds, "Absolutely. My mom will be thrilled. I'll pick you up at 4. And just like that, Grace was about to walk into the Torres family home, clutching a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers like armor, completely unaware that the family waiting on the other side of that door would show her what unconditional love actually looked like. But here's the question you have to ask yourself. When you've spent 10 years believing you're not worth choosing, when your own blood family has told you you're not good enough to love, how do you learn to trust again? How do you let yourself believe that this time, maybe this time, someone might actually stay? Grace's hand trembled as she reached for the doorbell. She stood on the front porch of the Torres family home, that bottle of wine clutched so tightly in her hands that her knuckles had turned white. And for a split second, just one terrifying, crystallizing second, she almost ran, almost turned around, got back in Samuel's truck, and retreated to the safe, familiar loneliness of her apartment. Because here's what nobody tells you about healing: the moment before it happens is absolutely terrifying. The moment before you let someone in, before you allow yourself to hope, before you trust again, that moment feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, and you have no idea if there's water below or rocks that will shatter you into 1,000 pieces. But before Grace could make that choice, the door swung open, and Rosa Torres rushed out like a force of nature, arms already extended, face beaming with such genuine joy that Grace froze. "Mija, you came!" And then Rosa pulled her into a hug, a real hug. The kind of embrace that smells like cinnamon and warmth and home. Grace's entire body went rigid. When was the last time someone had hugged her like this? When was the last time someone had touched her with affection instead of obligation? Her mother's hugs had always been stiff, performative, the kind you give for photographs. But Rosa held Grace like she actually wanted to, like Grace was someone worth holding, and something inside Grace's chest cracked just a little bit. Samuel watched from behind them, and he saw it. That moment of shock on Grace's face, that split second where she didn't know how to receive love freely given. And in that moment, Samuel Torres made a decision that would change both of their lives. He was going to show this woman what family actually meant, even if it took years, even if she fought him every step of the way. Inside the Torres home, chaos reigned in the most beautiful way possible. Miguel Torres, Samuel's father, emerged from the kitchen with flour on his hands and a warm, weathered smile that reminded Grace of old photographs, the kind where people actually looked happy. "Welcome, welcome. Any friend of Samuel's is family here." Family. That word again. Grace didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She'd been in this house for 30 seconds, and they'd already used that word twice. Her real family hadn't called her family in 10 years, and these strangers were throwing the word around like it meant nothing. Except it didn't mean nothing. It meant everything. And that's what scared her. The introductions came rapid fire. Maria, Samuel's oldest sister, a nurse with kind eyes and a baby on her hip. Diego, the teacher, with his wife Anna, who kept finishing his sentences. Lucia, the youngest, a social worker who looked at Grace with such open curiosity that Grace felt exposed, like Lucia could see right through her carefully constructed walls. And children. So many children running around, laughing, playing, filling the house with noise and life, and the kind of unbridled joy that Grace had forgotten existed. This wasn't the cold, silent dinners of her childhood where children were meant to be seen and not heard. This was loud. This was messy. This was real. But here's the thing about Grace. 10 years of rejection had taught her to be a skilled observer, to stay on the periphery, to never fully commit. So even as she smiled and answered questions and sat at the crowded dinner table, part of her remained detached, watching, waiting for the moment when they'd realize she didn't belong. Waiting for the moment when the warmth would turn cold. Waiting for the inevitable rejection. It didn't come. Instead, something stranger happened. They included her, naturally, effortlessly. When Maria talked about a difficult case at the hospital, she asked Grace's opinion. When Diego discussed his students, he wanted to know about Grace's art classes. When the children showed her their drawings, Rosa told them, "Grace is an artist, a real one. Show her respect." And Grace felt something she hadn't felt in a decade, seen. Not for what she could provide or achieve, but for who she actually was. Then came the question she'd been dreading. Lucia, with all the directness of a social worker who'd heard every story, asked, "So Grace, do you have family nearby?" The table didn't go silent. The Torres family was too loud for that. But Grace felt the attention shift toward her. Felt Samuel tense beside her. Felt her throat constrict around the truth she didn't want to tell. "No," Grace said carefully. "My family and I aren't in contact." She waited. Waited for the judgment, the pity, the invasive questions about what she'd done wrong to deserve abandonment. Instead, Miguel set down his fork, looked at Grace with eyes that had seen hardship, and survived it, and said, "Then you are welcome at our table any time, mija." Just like that, no questions about why, no demands for her story, just acceptance. And Rosa, sitting across from her, added quietly, "Family is not just blood. It's who shows up, who cares, who chooses to love you." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She excused herself to the bathroom, locked the door, and let herself cry for the first time in months. Because kindness, real kindness, hurts when you're not used to it. It breaks open all the places you've sealed shut just to survive. When Grace returned to the table, Rosa reached across and squeezed her hand gently. No words, just that squeeze, that simple gesture that said, "I see your pain, and you're safe here." And Grace thought, what if I let myself believe them? What if I let myself trust this? But the voice in her head, the one that sounded suspiciously like her father, whispered back, "They'll leave. Everyone leaves. Don't get comfortable." So Grace didn't. Not yet. But she came back. The next Sunday, and the one after that. And the one after that. Because here's the truth about healing. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in incremental trust, in tiny acts of courage that feel monumental when you're the one taking them. 3 weeks later, Rosa celebrated her 65th birthday, and she invited Grace to the party like it was the most natural thing in the world. Grace almost didn't go. She wasn't family. She was just someone who'd been to a few dinners. But Samuel texted her, "Mom specifically asked if you were coming. She'll be disappointed if you don't show." So Grace went, and she brought something she'd never given anyone before, a piece of herself. She'd painted Rosa's portrait, not from a photograph, but from memory, from the way Rosa looked during art class when she was fully absorbed in creating something, face soft with concentration and joy. It had taken Grace 20 hours to complete. 20 hours of capturing not just Rosa's face, but her essence, her warmth, her light. When Rosa unwrapped it at the party, she went completely silent. For a moment, Grace panicked. Maybe it was too personal, too intimate. Maybe she'd overstepped. But then Rosa looked up with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "Mija, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." She hung it in the living room immediately, above the fireplace, in the place of honor. And every time Grace visited after that, she'd see her artwork displayed with pride, and something inside her would whisper, "Maybe I do belong here. Maybe I am wanted." But old wounds don't heal that easily. A month later, Grace caught a nasty flu, the kind that leaves you shivering and feverish and barely able to get out of bed. She mentioned it casually at Sunday dinner, only attended because she'd committed before getting sick, and left early, stumbling back to her empty apartment where she planned to suffer alone like she always did. Because that's what Grace had learned. When you're sick, when you're vulnerable, when you need help, you're on your own. Her mother had always acted like illness was an inconvenience, a personal failing. Her father couldn't be bothered to miss work for something as trivial as a daughter with pneumonia. So Grace had learned to handle everything herself. The next morning, there was a knock at her door. Grace dragged herself out of bed, expecting a package delivery. Instead, she found Rosa Torres standing there with a care package that looked like it could feed an army: homemade soup, medicine, warm blankets, tea, and a thermos of some herbal remedy Rosa's mother used to make. "Rosa," Grace croaked, "you didn't have to." But Rosa was already inside, feeling Grace's forehead, tisking about the fever, setting up the soup. On the stove. "You're family now, Mija. We take care of family." And then she stayed. For 3 hours, made sure Grace ate, took medicine, was comfortable. When Rosa finally left, she kissed Grace's forehead like a mother would and said, "I'll check on you tomorrow." Grace lay in bed after Rosa left and cried. Not from the flu, from the realization that for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't alone in her suffering. Someone had shown up. Someone had cared. And the voice in her head that said, "Everyone leaves," got just a little bit quieter. The moments kept coming. Grace's car broke down on a Wednesday, and she mentioned it to Samuel in passing. By Thursday morning, Miguel was at her apartment with his tools, refusing to let her pay for anything. "Samuel told me you needed help," Miguel said simply. "That's what family does." Grace tried to protest. "But I'm not," Miguel cut her off gently. "You are part of this family now, Grace, whether you realize it or not." And Grace stood there in the parking lot, watching this man who owed her nothing fix her car like she was his own daughter, and she thought, how do they do this? How do they love so freely? What do they want from me? But that was the thing. They didn't want anything. They just gave, freely, without conditions, without expecting anything in return. When Lucia got engaged to Javier, she invited Grace to the engagement party. Grace hesitated. "I'm not even dating Samuel," she protested. "Why would I go to your engagement party?" Lucia laughed. "Because you're family, Grace. Samuel's girlfriend or not, you're one of us now. And at that party, surrounded by the extended Torres family, cousins and aunts and uncles and friends who'd been adopted into the fold just like Grace, she watched how they celebrated, how they loved, how they showed up for each other without hesitation. And for the first time, Grace allowed herself to think the dangerous thought, what if I could have this? What if this could be mine? 6 months had passed since that first Sunday dinner. 6 months of integration, of slow healing, of learning to trust. And somewhere along the way, Grace's relationship with Samuel had shifted from friendship into something deeper, something terrifying, something she couldn't quite name. They'd spent hours talking after Sunday dinners, sitting in his truck outside her apartment, sharing pieces of themselves. Samuel told her about his ex-girlfriend who'd called his family too much. Grace told him about the art residency that had cost her everything. And slowly, tentatively, they'd started to fall. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late October, after Sunday dinner, and Samuel drove Grace home like he always did. But this time, instead of saying goodnight, they sat in the car talking. About art, about family, about dreams and fears, and all the things people share when they're falling in love, but too scared to admit it. An hour passed. Then, too, Grace finally checked her phone and laughed. I should go in. It's almost midnight. But Samuel didn't start the car. Instead, he turned to her and asked, Grace, can I ask you something? The shift in his tone made Grace's heart race. Sure, she said, suddenly terrified of what he might ask. Why did your family cut you off? Grace tensed. She'd never told the Torres family the full story, never explained the dinner, the ultimatum, the complete rejection. I made a choice they didn't approve of, she said carefully. I chose my dreams over their expectations, so they chose to pretend I don't exist. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's their loss. Grace felt tears forming. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. I lost everything. You didn't lose everything, Samuel interrupted gently. You lost people who only loved you conditionally. That's not the same as losing everything. It still hurts, Grace whispered. I know it does, Samuel said. But Grace, you deserve people who choose you for who you are, not who they want you to be. Grace looked at him. This kind man who'd shown her nothing but patience and respect for 6 months. Your family has been so kind to me, she said. I don't understand why. Samuel reached across and took her hand, because that's what family does. And honestly, I think you've become more than just a friend my mom adopted. Grace's breath caught. What do you mean? Samuel squeezed her hand. I mean, I care about you, Grace, more than I probably should for someone who's just a friend. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise and everything Grace had been too afraid to hope for. But fear is a powerful force. Samuel, I'm terrified, Grace admitted. Of what? Of being abandoned again, of getting close to you and your family, and then losing it all. I don't think I could survive that. Samuel turned in his seat to face her fully. Grace, my family doesn't abandon people, and neither do I. We're not your blood family. We won't walk away when things get hard, or when you make a choice we don't understand. How can you be so sure? Grace asked, voice breaking. Because I've watched my family embrace people for decades, Samuel said. My sister's best friend from college, her family disowned her for being gay. My parents took her in, and she's been at every Sunday dinner for 15 years. My uncle's ex-wife still comes to Christmas because she's family, divorced or not. We don't give up on people, Grace. We don't walk away. We don't abandon the people we love. The people we love. Those words. Grace started crying, and she couldn't stop. Years of loneliness and fear and grief poured out of her. Samuel held her while she sobbed, and he didn't try to fix it or stop it or make her feel better. He just held her. And when Grace finally caught her breath, Samuel said quietly, I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I just wanted you to know, I'm here. My family is here. And we're not going anywhere. That was the midpoint. The moment where Grace chose to be vulnerable, chose to hope, chose to trust. They started dating officially the next week, and for the first time in her adult life, Grace allowed herself to be in a relationship without one foot out the door. But that didn't mean the fear went away. If anything, it intensified, because now she had something to lose. Now she'd let herself need someone, need a family. And the voice in her head kept whispering, "What happens when they leave? What happens when they realize you're not worth it? What happens when you're abandoned again?" 3 months into dating, Grace had her first major art exhibition at a real gallery. It was huge, career-defining, the kind of opportunity she'd worked toward for a decade. She sent the invitation to Samuel, but she didn't actually expect him to come. In her experience, people said they'd show up and then didn't. Her parents had promised to attend her college art show and never showed. Preston had skipped every exhibition because he had more important things to do. So Grace learned not to hope, learned not to expect, learned to celebrate her victories alone. The night of the exhibition, Grace arrived early to set up. She wore her best dress, put on the armor of professionalism, and prepared herself for the disappointment of scanning the crowd and not seeing any familiar faces. The gallery started to fill. Critics, collectors, strangers, and Grace smiled and networked, and played the part while her heart ached for someone, anyone, who knew her, who came because they cared about her, not her art. Then she heard a commotion at the entrance. Loud voices, children's laughter, the unmistakable sound of the Torres family. Grace turned, and her heart stopped. They were all there, all of them. Miguel and Rosa, dressed up and beaming. Maria and Carlos with their kids. Diego and Ana. Lucia and Javier. Even Samuel's cousins and aunts and uncles. 20+ people, carrying flowers, wearing proud smiles, descending on the gallery like a beautiful, chaotic storm. Rosa rushed over and pulled Grace into a hug. "Mija, we're so proud of you." Miguel shook her hand with tears in his eyes. "This is beautiful, Grace. You're so talented." The children asked if they could draw like her someday. Maria bought one of her paintings. Diego posted about the exhibition on social media. The entire family spent 2 hours at that gallery, looking at every single piece, asking questions, celebrating Grace like she was one of their own. And Grace couldn't stop crying. For the first time in 10 years, she had a family cheering for her accomplishments. For the first time since her parents abandoned her, someone had shown up. Samuel found her in the corner, overwhelmed and weeping. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I didn't think you'd come," Grace admitted. "I didn't think any of you would actually come." Samuel looked genuinely confused. "Why wouldn't we come? Your family." There was that word again, family, and for the first time, Grace let herself believe it might actually be true. The months that followed were the happiest of Grace's life. She and Samuel's relationship deepened. The Torres family continued to welcome her with open arms. She spent holidays with them, attended birthday parties and baptisms and graduations. She was there when Diego and Ana had their baby. She helped plan Lucia's wedding. She became woven into the fabric of their lives so completely that sometimes she'd forget she wasn't born into this family. Sometimes she'd forget she'd ever been alone. But healing isn't linear. There were still hard days. Days when Grace would panic and pull away. Days when the old voice in her head would tell her this was too good to be true. Days when she'd look around at Sunday dinner and think, when will they realize I'm not worth this? When will they get tired of me? When will they leave? And every time, Samuel would notice, would take her hand, would remind her, "We're not going anywhere, Grace. You're stuck with us." A year into their relationship, Thanksgiving arrived. Grace had spent every Thanksgiving alone since she was 22. 11 years of Chinese takeout and loneliness. But this year, Rosa insisted Grace come early to help cook. "You're family now, Mija. Family helps with Thanksgiving." So Grace showed up at 7 in the morning to a kitchen full of Torres women, Rosa, Maria, Lucia, Ana. And they cooked together. They laughed together. They shared stories and recipes and the kind of easy intimacy that comes from belonging. By the time the extended family arrived, over 30 people crammed into Miguel and Rosa's modest home. Grace was surrounded by noise and warmth and love. Children ran through the house, men watched football and argued good-naturedly. Women set the table and gossiped and tasted everything. It was chaos. It was perfect. It was everything Grace had never known she needed. And then, before dinner, Miguel stood up. The room quieted, because Miguel wasn't a man of many words, so when he spoke, people listened. "Before we eat," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to say something. This family has grown this year. We have new additions. Lucia's husband Javier, Diego and Ana's new baby." He paused, and his eyes found Grace across the room. And Grace looked up, surprised to be mentioned. Her heart started pounding. Miguel continued, "Grace, when Samuel first brought you to Sunday dinner a year ago, I saw a young woman who had been hurt deeply, who had been abandoned by people who should have protected her, and I prayed that this family could show you what real family looks like." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She could feel every person in that room watching her. "Over this past year," Miguel said, his voice breaking slightly, "you have become a daughter to Rosa and me, a sister to Maria, Diego, Samuel, and Lucia, a treasured part of this family. You were not born a Torres, but you are one now, by choice, by love, by commitment." He raised his glass, and Grace couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of unconditional love crashing over her like a wave. "To Grace," Miguel said, "chosen by this family, forever." The entire family echoed, "To Grace," and Grace broke, completely, utterly broke. A decade of grief and loneliness and unworthiness poured out of her in sobs. Rosa reached her first, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Then Maria, then Lucia, then the entire family surrounded her, holding her, claiming her, choosing her. And in that moment, Grace realized something terrifying and beautiful. She'd let herself be vulnerable. She'd opened her heart completely. She'd allowed herself to need this family, to love this family, to belong to this family, which meant she'd also given them the power to destroy her if they chose to. She was fully, completely, terrifyingly exposed. The old Grace would have run, would have protected herself, would have kept one foot out the door. But the new Grace, the healed Grace, the Grace who'd been loved back to life by the Torres family, she stayed. She let herself be held. She let herself be claimed. She accepted that she was worthy of being chosen. But that acceptance came with a question that haunted her even as she celebrated. What happens if I lose this? What happens if the one family that chose me decides I'm not worth choosing anymore? What happens if history repeats itself and I find myself alone again? Except this time, I'll know exactly what I lost. Because here's the thing about letting yourself be loved after trauma. It doesn't just heal you. It also terrifies you, because now you have something to lose. Now you know what love feels like. And the thought of losing it again isn't just painful, it's potentially devastating. So as Grace stood in that living room, surrounded by the Torres family, publicly claimed as a daughter and sister, she made a choice. She chose to trust them, chose to believe Miguel's words, chosen by this family, forever. But deep down, in the place where old wounds still whispered, she wondered, is forever real? Or is it just another promise that will be broken? And that question, that fear, that lingering doubt, despite all the healing, that's what makes what comes next in this story so crucial. Because Grace is about to face a test, a moment where she'll have to choose between the family that abandoned her and the family that chose her. A moment where she'll discover whether forever is just a word or an unbreakable promise. But that test, that confrontation, that moment of truth, that's still 2 years away. So here's the question that kept Grace awake at night for the next 2 years. What would she do if she ever saw her blood family again? Because that's the thing about healing, it's never quite complete. You can build a new life, find a new family, fall in love, experience unconditional acceptance, and still, somewhere deep in the corners of your heart, there's a small voice that wonders, what if? What if they came back? What if they apologized? What if they wanted to reconcile? Would you forgive them? Could you forgive them? Should you? Grace pushed those thoughts aside. She had more important things to focus on, like the fact that she and Samuel had been dating for 2 years now, and their relationship had become the kind of love story that made even Rosa cry happy tears. Like the fact that Grace's art career was thriving. She'd had 3 solo exhibitions, sold dozens of paintings, and built a name for herself in the local art community. Like the fact that every Sunday, without fail, she sat at the Torres family table and felt like she belonged. But on a warm Sunday evening in May, exactly 2 years after they started dating, Samuel changed everything. Dinner had been particularly loud that night. Diego and Anna's toddler was running circles around the table. Maria was arguing good-naturedly with her husband about whether to renovate their kitchen. Lucia was showing everyone photos from her honeymoon. Just a normal, chaotic, beautiful Torres family dinner. And then, as dessert was being served, Rosa's famous tres leches cake, Samuel stood up and asked for everyone's attention. The room fell silent. Samuel never asked for attention. He wasn't the type. Grace looked up at him, confused, and saw that his hands were shaking slightly. "Grace," he began, and his voice was thick with emotion. "2 years ago, my mom asked me to fix your kitchen cabinet. Best home repair I ever did." The family laughed, and Grace felt her heart start to race because she suddenly knew, what was about to happen. "You came into my life guarded and hurt, convinced you didn't deserve to be chosen. But Grace, I chose you the moment I met you. And more importantly, this family chose you." Samuel got down on one knee, and Grace couldn't breathe. Around them, the family went completely silent. Even the toddler stopped running. "You taught me that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who chooses to love you unconditionally. This family chose you, and now I'm asking you to choose me. Will you marry me?" Grace was crying so hard she could barely see the ring. Crying because 2 years ago, she'd been alone on Thanksgiving, convinced she'd never have a family again. And now she was surrounded by 30 people who loved her, and the man she loved was asking her to make it permanent, to make it forever. "Yes," she choked out. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The family erupted in cheers. Rosa was sobbing. Miguel pulled Samuel into a bear hug, while Maria rushed to embrace Grace. And in that moment, surrounded by noise and love and celebration, Grace felt something she'd never felt before. Certainty. This was her family. This was her home. This was forever. But planning a wedding brings up questions you don't expect. Like, who do you invite? Who walks you down the aisle? Whose family sits on your side of the church? And for Grace, those questions came with a painful decision. Should she invite the Montgomerys? 3 months before the wedding, Grace sat with Samuel at her kitchen table, staring at the guest list. Samuel watched her carefully. "You don't have to invite them," he said gently. "I know," Grace replied, "but what if I regret not trying one more time? What if, years from now, I look back and wish I'd extended an olive branch?" Samuel took her hand. "Grace, you've tried. For 10 years you tried. They're the ones who refused." "I know," Grace said again. "But this is different. This is my wedding. This is me saying, I've built a beautiful life without you, but you're still welcome to witness it if you want." So Grace sent the invitations. Cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Montgomery. "Mr. Christopher Montgomery," she wrote a brief note. "I'm getting married. I'd like you to be there. Grace." She didn't expect a response. And for months, she didn't get one. The Montgomerys remained silent, and Grace told herself she was fine with it. She had a wedding to plan, and a family who actually cared. She didn't need the people who'd abandoned her. 6 months after the proposal, Grace stood in a bridal boutique with Rosa, Maria, Lucia, and Anna, trying on wedding dresses. The Torres women fawned over every dress, offered opinions, took pictures, made her feel like a princess. And when Grace found the dress, a simple, elegant gown that made her feel beautiful, Rosa started crying. "Mija, you look perfect. Miguel is going to cry when he sees you." Grace froze. "Miguel?" Rosa smiled. "You did ask him to walk you down the aisle, didn't you?" Grace hadn't. because asking Miguel to walk her down the aisle meant publicly acknowledging that her own father wouldn't, meant admitting that Richard Montgomery had chosen his pride over his daughter, meant accepting that her blood father had forfeited that right. "I don't want to impose," Grace started, but Rosa cut her off. "Mija, Miguel would be honored. You should ask him." So that night, Grace called Miguel. Her voice shook as she said, "Miguel, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you walk me down the aisle?" There was a long pause. Then Miguel's voice, thick with emotion, "Mija, it would be the greatest honor of my life." The morning of the wedding arrived sunny and perfect. Grace woke up in Rosa and Miguel's guest room. She'd stayed there the night before because Rosa insisted on doing her hair and makeup and because Grace didn't want to be alone. As Rosa carefully styled Grace's hair, she said quietly, "Your blood family doesn't know what they lost, Mija, but we know what we gained. A daughter." Grace met Rosa's eyes in the mirror. "I'm the one who gained a family." Rosa kissed the top of her head. "We gained each other." At the church, Grace's side was packed. Over 60 members of the Torres extended family, her art students, her friends, the people who'd chosen her over the years. Samuel's side was equally full, and as Grace stood in the vestibule, holding Miguel's arm, wearing the dress that made her feel beautiful, she realized something. She didn't need the Montgomerys here. She already had everything she needed. Miguel looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Ready, Mija?" Grace squeezed his arm. "Ready, Papa." The words slipped out naturally, and Miguel's face crumpled. He'd never asked Grace to call him that, never pushed. But hearing it now, on her wedding day, broke him in the most beautiful way. "Let's get you married," he whispered. The ceremony was perfect. Grace walked down the aisle on Miguel's arm, and true to Rosa's prediction, he cried. So did Samuel. So did half the church. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Miguel said clearly, "Her mother and I do. With love and pride. Not her family. Not her father. Her mother and I. Rosa and Miguel. The parents who'd chosen her. The parents who'd earned the title." During the vows, Grace said through tears, "Samuel, your family taught me what unconditional love looks like. They chose me when I felt unchosen. They loved me when I felt unlovable. They made space for me when I felt like I had nowhere to belong. You didn't just give me your heart, you gave me a family. And that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Samuel responded, "Grace, you taught me that family is built on choice, not obligation. You've made our family richer, our lives fuller, our hearts bigger. I choose you today, tomorrow, and every day after, forever." Forever. That word again. And this time, Grace believed it. The reception was in full swing, music playing, people dancing, the Torres family celebrating with their signature joy and chaos, when a server approached Grace on the dance floor. "Excuse me, Mrs. Torres, there are some people at the door asking to see you. They said they're your family." Grace's heart stopped. Samuel, who'd been dancing with her, immediately tensed. Grace looked toward the entrance and saw them. Richard Montgomery, older and grayer than she remembered. Patricia Montgomery, still elegant but tired-looking. Christopher Montgomery, uncomfortable in his expensive suit. After 12 years of silence, they'd come. "Do you want me to ask them to leave?" Samuel asked quietly, protectively. Grace took a breath. This was it, the moment she'd wondered about for 2 years. The test. "No," she said. "I'll talk to them." She walked toward her blood family with Samuel at her side, and she felt the entire Torres family watching, ready to protect her if needed. Patricia spoke first. "Grace, you look beautiful." "Thank you for coming," Grace said carefully. "I didn't think you would." Richard stepped forward. "We received your invitation. We thought we should come." Grace felt anger rise in her chest. 12 years of silence. And they showed up now. "Why now?" she asked. "After 12 years of nothing?" Christopher shifted uncomfortably. "Grace, we were wrong. Dad had a health scare last year. It made us realize we've missed 12 years of your life. We'd like to try to fix that." Grace felt a mix of emotions: anger, hurt, grief, and something that might have been hope if she let it be. But she'd learned something important over the past 3 years. She didn't need their validation anymore. "For 12 years I tried to reach out," Grace said, her voice steady. "I sent cards, made calls, extended invitations. You rejected every single one. You told me I was dead to you." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong, Grace. We were stubborn and prideful and wrong." Richard added, "We'd like a chance to make amends. If you'll allow it." Grace looked back at the reception, at Rosa and Miguel dancing, at Samuel's siblings laughing with their children, at the family that had chosen her, loved her, made space for her when she had nowhere to belong. And she made her choice. "I appreciate you coming," Grace said. "I do. But here's the truth. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You rejected me for choosing to live my own life. And while I've forgiven you for my own peace, I don't need you anymore." "Grace," Richard started, but Grace held up her hand. "I spent 12 years believing I was unworthy of family because you made me feel that way. But I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who supports you, who chooses you even when it's hard." She gestured to the Torres family. "These people chose me when I had nothing to offer them. They loved me unconditionally. They became my real family. So, while I appreciate the gesture, I don't need you to make amends. I already have everything I need." Patricia's voice broke. "We're your parents. You were my parents," Grace interrupted gently but firmly. "Miguel and Rosa Torres are my parents now. They've earned that title through years of love and support. You lost that right when you walked away." Christopher tried one more time. "Grace, we miss you. You miss the version of me you wanted me to be," Grace said. "You never actually knew the real me, and that's your loss, not mine." She turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. "I don't say this with anger. I say it with peace. I hope you find happiness, but my happiness is here, with the family that chose me. Goodbye." Grace walked back to Samuel, who wrapped his arms around her. "You okay?" he asked. Grace looked around at the reception, at her real family celebrating, at the life she'd built, at the love she'd found. "I'm perfect," she said. "I'm exactly where I belong." 10 years later, Grace sat at a Sunday dinner, because some traditions are too precious to break, with her 2 children playing at her feet. Her daughter, Elena, looked up at her with curious eyes. "Mama, why don't we see your mama and papa?" Grace glanced across the table at Miguel and Rosa, now in their 70s, still hosting Sunday dinners, still making everyone feel loved. "You do, mija," Grace said, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "Those are my mama and papa. The ones who chose to love me." Rosa, who'd overheard, wiped tears from her eyes. She reached across the table and took Grace's hand. "And we'd choose you 1,000 times over, mija, 1,000 times." Grace squeezed back, surrounded by the noise and chaos and unconditional love of the Torres family, her family, and realized that the scared, lonely woman who'd shown up at her first Sunday dinner 12 years ago wouldn't even recognize her now. That woman had believed she was unworthy of being chosen. This woman knew her worth. That woman had been afraid to trust. This woman had built a life on trust. That woman had been alone. This woman had a family that would never let her go. Because here's what Grace learned: family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up consistently. It's about loving without conditions. It's about making space at your table for the people who need a home. And sometimes, the family you create is infinitely better than the one you were born into. Grace had been abandoned by her family, but she'd been chosen by his. And that choice, that unconditional, unwavering, forever kind of choice, made all the difference. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between the family you were born into and the family you've built? Have you experienced the pain of conditional love or the healing power of being chosen? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. And if this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe, because we share stories like this every week. Stories about love, redemption, second chances, and finding home in unexpected places. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're worthy of being chosen. Because everyone deserves a family that shows up. Everyone deserves unconditional love. And everyone deserves to know you are worthy, exactly as you are.